Selamat pagi from Indonesia or good morning. I'm really glad to share to everyone here. And I'm looking forward to discuss with you about the importance of these oceans. And maybe you can see on the next slide is maybe you're wondering, is she really going to talk about marine debris or other unrelated environmental impact during this current crisis of pandemic and health? We should focusing more on health instead of environment, but actually there is a relations which quite strong between the health and also environment, and Dr. Renzo is already explaining about that as well. So when I want to give you a context to making sure that you can have the same concern with me as well. I grew up in Pramuka Island, which is in the northern part of Jakarta, as what Andrea said, and my parents teach me lots of value, especially about curiosity. And you can see from the next slide, because of that, I grew up become a really loving person of nature, and then I started my college, my campus life in Bandung. I took environmental engineering, and I learned a lot about the environment. At first, I thought I will look at like very beautiful things in our environment, but instead, all I can see is actually waste. Because I learned about waste, toilets, sewage, and other nasty things, as you can see from the next pictures. And these we can see from this campus. You can go to the next slide, please. And it made me realize that there's a difference between the theory and also the real life we're facing in the islands. When the theory taught me to do segregation of waste at source, but actually it is not implemented on my islands. So it gives me the curiosity of asking how I can help and why it's also happening. So we can see the next slides. There's a quote in my campus, which is really inspires me, which it says that this is a place to ask every question and you must find an answers. So from that way, I started to ask from my professors and other lecturers from other campuses on what can I do to help this. So it brings me to the next slides, which on the third year of university, I realized that I need to do something more for the environment, especially because I know the theory and I realized about the island's conditions in Indonesia. So started with 3, now we have more than 1,000 volunteers across the Asia. You can see from the next slides, we have now since I graduated back in 2017, I made it as a legitimate NGO. So as a legitimate NGO, we have 4 pillars of programs. So 4 pillars of programs, we are focusing on marine debris research, campaign and workshop, community development, and also CSR collaborations. And next slide, you can see when I really happy and started to experience my peak of life, for examples, but well, I can see that actually the recycling rate is actually increasing, the reduction rate is actually also increasing because we are successfully with our eco trips program, refillable stores, stuff like that. Next slides. You can see actually the pandemic happened. So it started to give me a ton, and like I need to find a correlations between my works and the relevancy with the current pandemic. And at that time, I sort of like confused because at the first until the second week, I tried to manage my own team on making sure how all of those field works into a working from home situations. And the next week, I realized that after 2 weeks, it's not going to stop any sooner. So I need to change my strategy on my NGO. And I realized that when we're gathering the data about the medical waste that we found, it's actually already founded a lot in beaches all over the world. And even in Indonesia, we already found that as well in rivers and also the streets. And it's also really frightening because it can actually become a carrier of the virus. And we also promote the reusable mask for those that healthy. And we're trying to also teach the medical workers on how to properly segregate their waste and also to recycle the reusable mask to make sure it won't become a carrier of the virus. And the next data that we found as well is actually it's better to use reusable thing other than the single-use plastic, such as for food containers, because the plastic can actually contain the virus up to 3 days. And from this data, it brings me to the next week, which the fourth week of the pandemic, we started to make some actions movement, which is we are giving a refillable soaps to the local community, which is impacted by the tourism sectors. You can see it from the next slides. And yes, this is the reusable hand soaps that we give to the community because they usually use the single-use plastic sachets rather than the refillable one. And the next week, we started to realize that most of the recycling efforts in the islands or even other cities and other countries is actually being stopped. So we are trying to facilitate, even though during this pandemic, the waste needs to be still recycled. And it cannot be just neglected and left in the corner because it can actually become also a virus carrier if it's not disinfected properly or recycled properly. And the next slide, therefore, we make a webinar which we gather more than 300 persons in Indonesia, and we successfully made one of our government to give the status of the waste recycling on medical waste and their intakes on the marine debris situation in Indonesia during the pandemic. And it's also the first attempts of the government to speak on public, especially to the communities. And we also launched our program on giving reusable phone holders instead of single-use phone holders for medical workers because they are using the reusable plastic bags, the single-use plastic bags every day rather than reusable phone holders. And it's actually adding more unnecessary waste. And the next week, it brought me also, my NGO started to think about the impact of the ride-hailing services, which is also providing more delivery situation in Indonesia. It increases up to twice the number of the original before the pandemic situation. So the plastic bags is actually increasing as well. So we collaborate with the NGOs on public health in Indonesia, and we also collaborate with the government that is obliged to do the research data so we can know and track the waste changes in Indonesia. And it brought me to the week 8, which we make a webinar about behavior change because we realized, okay, so this is all about the choices of the community. And we realized that actually, if we're talking about the behavior change, we need to invest more the innovators through educations. Therefore, they're going to do a social marketing campaigns and also try to give the concerns to other citizens and make them also change their habits and also try to segregate their waste, reducing their waste, and also start to care more about the environment because it actually promoting a better health situations. And the next slides, through the website and webinar, we realized that actually there is an impact of tourism industry about the pandemic itself. You have to see tourism sectors here going to clean up because we realize most of the tourism sectors is actually losing their income. So they started to destroying the environment. And some of them even doesn't care about their waste. So we're collaborating with the government to make an incentivized workshops for these tourism sectors so they can enjoy the workshops and learning about the environment, how they can manage their waste on their own area, and then they get incentivized every day they go to the workshops. And the week 10, we try to make a booklet together with these other NGOs and governments to make sure they know in an easy way and also a fun way how is the relations between these waste and other environmental issues with health. Because we realize the climate change also can affect and may affect about the other pandemics that is going to be happening in the future. Therefore, it's really important to us to know more about how we can do in our home or what we can do as an activist to make sure that the waste management system in our own area can support the pandemic situations. And it brings me the last week here, which is trying to convince you that our waste is really related with health. And even one of our government says that the COVID situation will be finished in Indonesia, not if the last patient has been cured, but the last infected waste has been treated. And our choices is really matters for the environment. It may affect the future pandemics, so we better start our behavior changes from now. And you can make a change from your own home or your own home by segregate your waste, reusable masks instead of single-use masks, so you can choose that. And then you can also give reusable phone holders for front lines that still using single-use bags to cover their phone. And then you can choose local resources, reduce packaging, and also delivery. And of course, evaluate act, adapt, and prepare for the new normal, because in terms of waste and health, everything can happen during the pandemic and after the pandemic. And looking forward next to talk and discuss with you guys. Terima kasih, and please don't lose hope, because we need to protect the environment even though during this pandemic. Thank you.
Tomorrow's a new day. I'm here standing with you, here standing with me, standing with the world on our shoulders. I'm here standing